Thank you very much. Good morning. That's all you got? Good morning. This is the most important global transportation conference in the world, all year long. We have a record number of attendants, 2,200 attendees from 24 countries. So let's have a little energy here. Good morning. Good morning. One more time. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, good enough. Not great, but good enough. Let's become a little self-aware and identify who we have in the room. How many people are BCOs? How many people are shippers? Please raise your hand. Okay, so I counted about 400 or 500 people raised their hand. That means about 100 some odd didn't raise their hands who are really shippers, because I know for a fact that there's over 600 shippers here. I know that from JOC telling me that. I know that from Greg Ritter, our Chief Customer Officer, who's set up meetings with pretty much all of them over the next 3 days. How many people are ocean carriers? Please raise your hands. Okay, fantastic. How many people are 3PLs, NVOCCs, freight forwarders? Quite a bit, okay. How many people are terminal operators associated with a port? Okay. Intermodal? Some intermodal. Trucking, drayage? How many people are technology providers? Quite a bit. That tells us something too. What other categories did I miss? This pretty much covers most of the people here. Let's go about geographically. How many people came from Asia? Okay, looks like about 20%. How many people came from Europe? Similar amount. How many North America? A larger amount. How about rest of world? Latin America? Okay, great. So it is a global conference, and that's the theme of what I want to speak about. So when I was invited to give this keynote presentation by JOC, I was first of all humbled, because the speakers who have spoken for the keynote presentation in the last 16 years are the luminaries of the industry. Last year, Frank Appel, the head of Deutsche Post DHL, spoke. I can't compare to his intellect. This is a guy who's got a PhD in neurobiology, got master's degrees in chemistry. He more or less invented the warehouse of the future, which is now the warehouse of the present. And the slogan is a slogan that I wish we had thought about. Focus, connect, grow. And I want to talk a lot about the connect part of that: focus, connect, grow. A couple years before, Soren Sko spoke. This is someone who, when he became CEO of Maersk, had a $1 billion profit swing, took over a company that was losing $500 million, and a year later was making $500 million. So my hat's off to Soren Sko. And I saw the YouTubes that are online from previous speakers, and I also read the media articles that came out from the previous speakers. And I got to give the award for most profound quote to C.C. Tung, the powerful head of Orient Overseas, who said, "I believe that information is the oxygen of the modern age. Information is the oxygen of the modern age." And then in 2014, Fred Smith gave the keynote presentation. Fred Smith, in my opinion, is the most important innovator in the history of transportation since Henry Ford. I saw 2 YouTubes back to back the other day. One was someone who was promoting the benefits of trade protectionism, and the other one was Fred talking about free trade. And Fred's arguments, fact after fact after fact, rational, objective, what led to an irrefutable, in my opinion, conclusion that free trade is the way to go. I'm going with Fred Smith on free trade versus protectionism. I'd like to take a vote from this global community of transportation professionals. How many people feel that trade protectionism is the best thing for the world? Raise your hands, please. For those watching on YouTube on the recording later, I didn't see one person who raised their hand. How many people think free trade is the way to go? Raise your hand. So almost everyone in the audience raised their hand. I don't know what the third alternative is for those who didn't vote. So for 16 years, there's been a tradition of the keynote speaker coming up and offering conversation starters, thought ideas of things that could be discussed over the next couple of days. So I've come up with 7 thought ideas that I think might be useful for starting the conversation. The first one is my opinion that we, as global transportation professionals, have a duty, have a responsibility, have an obligation, need to have an ethical commitment to transcend nationalism and to really think and act globally. How many people are my age and remember 35, 40 years ago there was a television series on PBS called Cosmos with Carl Sagan? Okay, a handful of people. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, it was a documentary series on nature and on science and on the cosmos, on the universe. And one of the last episodes showed a spacecraft going up into space and looking down at Earth, the blue planet. And Carl Sagan, the scientist, was saying, "And look at Earth, the blue planet. There's no boundaries. You don't see the national boundaries. These are all man-made. They're not organic." And that's true. The national boundaries are boundaries that we've made, humans have made. They're not made by nature. And a very common phrase now in the United States is, "Make America great again." Well, that's fine. It's great to have America be great. Who would quarrel with that? It's great to have America be great. I would like to offer a new mantra on top of that, which is, make the world great. I don't know about make the world great again, because I'm not sure when it was great. I know it was always had good things, had bad things, but let's make the world great is a real great mission, and we, the people in this room, can actually contribute to that by promoting global trade. This group is global citizens. I don't know about you, but I consider myself both a citizen of my birthplace, the United States, and a citizen of the world. And as I grow older, and as I travel more, and as I have business in more parts of the world, I now consider myself more a global citizen than just a mere citizen of the country I was born in. And I'd like to ask you to answer honestly, how many of you, I'll give you 2 choices, how many of you think that when you look at yourself and you identify yourself, you think more as a citizen of your country, and how many of you think more as a citizen of the world? Those of you, all of you in this room, global trading people. How many people honestly feel identified more patriotically with their own country? Please raise your hand. Okay, so a very significant amount. How many people identify themselves more with global leaders? Slightly more. So that's good. Slight more majority consider themselves global citizens than just national citizens. That leads me to my next thought that I'd like to offer, which is, in my opinion, global trade will reduce the #1 problem in the world right now, which is terrorism. I read a book about 10, 15 years ago by Dr. Aaron Beck, and it was called Prisoners of Hate. And it was analyzing the psychology of a terrorist. And basically what it said was, to be a terrorist, you have to think, I think it was about you had to have about 4 different beliefs in total. First belief was, I strongly believe in X, Y, Z to be absolutely, positively, 100% true. The second belief, which by itself is a very harmless belief. The second belief was, I believe that other people, in fact all other people, should also share those beliefs categorized in category #1. The third belief was, this is the mind of the terrorist, that, and if everyone else does not share in my commitment to the truthfulness of these beliefs, then that's an awful, horrible, terrible, unsustainable situation leading to belief #4, and therefore I must kill them. And that's how terrorists think. They think very small. They haven't been exposed to the whole world. Terrorists have been exposed to one small sliver of their world. And global trading will help, in my opinion, to dispel that narrowness of thinking. I believe that, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how it evolves, privacy will be sacrificed for security over the next 10 or 15 years. I think there's a hypothesis that could be true that in order for global security, eventually, as technology evolves, our whole lives will be recorded from the moment that we're born. Everything we see, just like a policeman has a camcorder to record what happened, we may have a chip or there may be some technology that not only records what we see and what we say and what others say to us, but also even what we think. Imagine the ramifications if that comes true. Thought number 3, coming into our industry. As the earlier speakers said, there's been an enormous amount of consolidation that took place last year. My view is that more, even more, global consolidation in the transportation industry is going to take place. It's inevitable, particularly in ocean transportation. Why am I picking on ocean transportation as the one segment? Because if you look at the opportunities to improve on-time performance, invoice accuracy, and visibility of the freight, it's an enormous opportunity. It's nowhere near Six Sigma. Why is on-time performance, invoicing accuracy, and visibility of the freight not at peak levels, not at high levels in this part of the supply chain? In my opinion, it's quite simple. The ocean industry can't afford it because of the way the industry is set up right now. The return on capital is about the same or slightly less than the cost of capital. So there's really no economic value being added in the ocean transportation industry. It's as if the metabolism of the industry is off because there's an underinvestment in technology. When I say metabolism, it's like, so in our body we have a thyroid and we have a immune system that is constantly measuring how we're relating to the environment and making adjustments as a result of that to keep us within a safe band, not too hot, not too cold. And in the ocean container industry, the metabolism is off. It's like the thyroid's not working. There's overcapacity, there's undercapacity. There's big, big swings. Over time, with global consolidation, I believe more efficiency will be brought to the industry, and those swings won't be as great. Which brings me to thought number 4, which is mergers are tricky and sometimes very difficult, but worth it. I say they're tricky and difficult because, having done 500 of them, you have to do a lot of things right to get a merger to work. You've got to get the cultures meshed into one new culture. You can't have 2 legacy cultures. You have to get everyone on one technology platform. You've got to get the whole back office integrated, HR, finance, accounting, sales and marketing. You have to face the customers as one company, and you have to do all this very quickly and seamlessly and accurately, or you're going to lose your customer service, and therefore you're going to lose your customers. Having put that disclaimer out there that mergers are not for the faint of heart, they're not for people who have management teams, they're not for management teams that aren't experienced in the complexities of doing acquisitions. That said, I do believe that there's big upside to the industry by getting economies of scale, by getting enough revenue so that investments can be made in technology in order to improve what needs to be improved in the business. Thought number 5, integration of transportation modes, air, sea, intermodal, truck, last mile, everything, A to Z, is going to increase. More and more integration of different modes. Now, in the 2 speakers ago, the JOC individual mentioned that we broke some news with JOC. I was talking to, kind of just matter-of-factly, we didn't intend to break some news. It's not ripe. It's not even named, as they said. But I was chatting with Bill Cassidy, and I just happened to tell him that we, at our company, have been integrating our supply chain business with our last mile business so that customers give us their goods inbound right to the warehouse. We do everything that's done in the warehouse. We do everything that goes all the way to the last mile, to someone's apartment, to someone's house, and we do the reverse logistics too. And that one-stop shop, in my opinion, is where the world is going. Integration of different transportation modes. When I speak to chief logistics officers or heads of global supply chains at our customers, I hear the same story over and over again. And that story is, help me, I've got my CFO or COO or CEO, depending on who they report to, on my back telling me I'm spending $500 million or $5 billion in transportation, find me 2%. And the chief logistics officer tells the C-suite, well, I can do that. I just go to all my vendors, I can squeeze them all and say, hey, the big cheese wants us to knock 2% off. You want to keep the relationship? Knock 2% off. Service may go down, and when capacity changes and the balance changes, we may not get capacity, but we can do that. Or instead of doing that, instead of squeezing the vendors, they can work with the vendors, with the carriers, with the 3PLs in order to function more efficiently, in order to function more effectively, to find in the supply chain where there is waste, where there is inefficiency, where there are defects in the process, and to collaboratively remove those defects, to get not just the 2% improvement that the C-suite is asking for, but sometimes very substantially more. And if we do not do that, shippers will do it themselves. They will find a way to do it because the intensity of focus on the C-suite throughout the global corporations around the world is very intense to take out more cost, to show more productivity. And transportation and logistics is a big spend, and it's an obvious target to go after. Look what Amazon has done. Amazon was unhappy with some of its vendors, so it started doing it itself, performing the same services themselves, and making the threat to get even bigger in that. Thought number 6, information technology is even more important than we already know it is. Somebody asked me the other day if you had to take all your money and put it into one stock and hold it for 20 years, what would that stock be? So I left out our own company. Don't want to do a paid commercial for an unpaid commercial for ourselves. So I said that would clearly be Google. Why Google? Because Google's mission, Google's business plan is to organize all the information in the world and make it readily accessible to everyone. How cool is that? To organize all the information in the world and make it easily accessible to every single person. That's where I think our industry is going. That's where I think all industries are going. Our industries are about information. In our case, it's about information of where freight is, where it needs to go, and what's the best and most efficient way to get there. In addition to information technology, the other big trend in technology, I think, that's going to affect this group, who's mainly focused in international trade, is 3D printing. Why do I say 3D printing? 3D printing, first of all, is at least 5 or 10 years away from being prevalent. And you wouldn't ordinarily think of something, a machine that's in somebody's basement or in a FedEx Kinko's, as affecting international trade lanes. But it will, because so many things that are now made in low-cost labor countries and then shipped long distances and imported will not necessarily have to do that. It won't be necessary to do that anymore because those goods will be made, the information of how to make them will be encoded and decoded in a 3D printer right on site. And you look around the room and you see the things, everything in this room, almost everything that's carbon-based, and that's not everything other than human beings in this room, eventually will be able to be manufactured, eventually, by 3D printing. Shorter supply chains. Brings me to point number 7. Idea number 7 is that communication and connectedness are becoming even more intense. Communication and connectedness are becoming even more intense. This has profound ramifications for intermediaries. Intermediaries could be disintermediated by this over time. Look at what Alibaba and Maersk signed just a couple months ago. It didn't get too much press, but I think it's a really, really important event where you have a major shipper, or indirectly they're customer shippers. Alibaba is more of a marketplace, more like an eBay than an Amazon is, which is a retailer. But indirectly, the shippers on Alibaba connecting directly to the transport company, directly with no intermediaries. Let's watch that space. I believe what's going on in the big picture, the big mega trend is artificial intelligence is getting exponentially better, and the progress in artificial intelligence is accelerating, and machine-to-machine communication without the involvement of human beings is where the future is going, and that's going to have profound implications for global transportation. Knowing where things are, to start with, and where they have to go, and the most efficient way to get from here to there, we don't have that nailed yet here in 2017. We don't know where all the freight is right this minute, by a long shot. We don't have it all mapped out where it needs to go in order to finally get to the last mile to the consumer. We will have that someday, and there will be machine-to-machine communication that does almost all the jobs of all of us here in this room. So those are the 7 thoughts I had to get a conversation going before we open up for Q&A. In summary, if you didn't figure it out, I'm a big proponent of globalization. More information, more visibility, more efficiency. And this group of 2,200 global transportation professionals is at the center of that trend and can play a big role in improving the world by continuing to do better and better what we're already doing. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity to meet with you and open up for questions.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you for the Container Port Group for sponsoring this session. As a reminder, there's 2 different ways you can ask questions, either the conventional come to the mic or via Slido, and that's www.sli.do, and that the event code is #TPM2017. You can send me questions here, and I'll make sure Brad gets them. Are there any initial questions from the floor?
Questions or comments?
Brad, I think this will be no surprise considering my opening comments, but can you talk a little bit more about how you see the integration of the NVO and forward divisions into the surface transport assets?
I think that all of our different divisions in our company, first of all, are already working together much more closely every single week than the week before. The reason we're doing that is that's what customers want. So I was at RELA, the Retailers in Transportation Convention a few weeks ago, met with many heads of transportation and logistics at many, many retailers, and every single one of those conversations was about not a mode, air, ocean, truck. It was about how can we take costs out of our total supply chain. That's their mission. So they're not thinking mode, they're thinking total supply chain. So in every single one of our divisions, that integration is taking place.
Interesting. You know, you spoke a lot about protectionism and globalism. Considering some of the anxiety actually at this conference, what would you recommend to executives and other managers that are kind of hearing all this chatter? How do you plan accordingly?
What chatter and anxiety specifically are you referring to?
I would trade protectionism.
So I have anxiety about that. I think that, which is why I picked it for my topic. I don't think that trade protectionism works. I think that went out 35 years ago. I think the vast majority of people have figured that out. So I'm hoping that this administration's saber rattling about trade protectionism is just that, saber rattling, and the beginning of a negotiation that when the dust settles and everything is finalized, we don't have those. Because I think it would be a big step backwards for international trade and for the growth of humanity.
Do you have any other questions? You mentioned expecting a faster clip in consolidation, particularly on the ocean side. When it comes to XPO, where are you looking for new companies to acquire, or are you still in that second phase of bringing in the non-assets and assets integration?
Well, we're certainly not going to buy an ocean carrier. That's just not in our idea whatsoever. And the reason is very simple. It doesn't make a lot of money. It's a very tough business. I mean, I'm grateful to have relationships with the ocean carriers, but it's just not a hugely profitable business. It doesn't have a great return on capital. Having said that, we're not going to be buying any companies in the near term. From 2011 to 2015, we looked at about 2,000 companies to buy. We selected 17 of what we considered the best ones that had leading positions, ones that were complementary to the other 16, and we're happy with what we've got now. And there's a big opportunity to further optimize the platform that we've got. Now, eventually, whether that's in a year or 2 years or 3 years or whenever, sure, we'll return to the acquisition market, but it will probably be more in contract logistics. We have 750 warehouses now. I'd like to build up that footprint. It'll probably more in last mile, probably more in ground transportation rather than air and ocean.
Okay. Here's a question. Oh,
Mark?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Thanks. Hey, Brad.
Hi.
Mangaluzzo,
Hey,
Journal
Bill.
of Commerce. Your point about sharing communication, information, machine to machine, all spot on. I want to focus just on the marine terminal. You have the ocean carrier, the terminal operator, forwarder, broker, trucker, BCO, et cetera. Each sector has a lot of information that it needs to operate itself. What is preventing all of these sectors to share their information together? Is it technology is not there yet, or is it just a refusal by the partners to get together?
I think it's time. I think ultimately Adam Smith's hidden hand of capitalism will force all those participants you mentioned to cooperate with each other, to share information, because the net result will be more efficiency. And that's what we as a transportation industry have to deliver. That's our mission. Our mission is to move goods through the supply chains of our customers more efficiently, more cost effectively, more accurately, more predictably. And sharing information in a proper way, in a legal way, is a big element in succeeding to do that.
And is the technology there? I mean, do we have the type of single portal where each sector can provide information and disseminate it?
It is and it isn't. It could be developed and integrated very easily, but there's so many different platforms that so many of those players are using that there is no one single platform. But that's not a huge order if everyone had the resolve to go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
Brad, and here's another question from Slido. To drive growth successfully, what niche or trend or market holds do you credit XPO with seeing or capitalizing on before or better than your competitors?
Well, first of all, I have a huge amount of respect for our competitors. There's some fantastic competitors in each line of business that we operate in. The place I think that we've got the biggest differential from our competitors is last mile for heavy goods. So we are the largest provider of last mile for heavy goods in North America. We're about $1 billion of revenue in that. So it's not the biggest part of our company, but it's more than 3 times the size of the next 3 last mile players put together. So we have an advantage of scale. We have an advantage of the technology. We've invested tens of millions of dollars in our patented proprietary technology focusing on customer service. We just do it very, very well. So I think last mile is where there's the biggest delta in our performance and the competitors.
With FTR. Hi, Brad. How
Hello.
are you? As a futurist and somebody who specializes in looking over the edge of the horizon and is pretty good at it, could you offer an opinion on autonomous vehicles, both when you think they'll become a factor and what the effects of that will be on our business?
Yes. So we just finished an RFP about a month ago with trucks, with truck suppliers. So we're in the middle of doing RFPs, global purchasing bids, with all our vendors, for $13 billion worth of vendors. And one of the first ones we tackled was trucks, was tractors and trailers. And so as part of every single presentation, unprompted, from the truck manufacturers, from the OEMs, was what they're doing with autonomous vehicles and where that's going. And there were some little differences, but the general consensus was, in stages, autonomous trucks will be present on the highways in 3 years. And the next stage will be present on the highway in 5 to 7 years. And in 10 years from now, there will be fully autonomous trucks everywhere. This is the United States I'm speaking. United States and Europe. Europe's actually a little bit ahead of the United States in autonomous vehicles. I'm not up to date on where we are with autonomous vehicle regulation in Asia, because at the end of the day, it's not about the technology. The technology is almost there. I mean, there's a lot of big companies putting a lot of R&D into, and they have been for several years now, in autonomous vehicles. What needs to be developed now is the regulatory environment so that it's more safe. Ultimately, I'm very convinced it will be much more safe. Computers don't drink and drive. Computers don't fall asleep and get sleep apnea. Computers see things in program more. But computers also go on the blink, as we all know. So there has to be fallback systems for that. And there has to be very tight cybersecurity in those autonomous vehicles, or else criminals and foreign countries and bad guys in general will go into other countries and use that to wreak havoc. So there is some regulatory, just like with drones. Drones technology is already there actually right now. The regulatory environment to make it a safe rollout is many years away because it's a pretty complicated issue. But both of those are here, and they're going to be here more and more. That's undeniable. And they will bring more efficiency, which is our mission, to our customers. The costs will be much less. Unless something develops, I don't think autonomous vehicles are going to have Teamsters representing them.
Excuse me.
There won't be rats.
This is another question from Slido. As direct carriers become more integrated with technology, do you see a need for NVOCCs in the future?
Do I see a what?
A need for NVOCCs in the future?
I do. I don't think that intermediaries will be completely 100% disintermediated. Because I think if you look at other industries, if you look at the oil business, you look at construction, you look at commodities, you look at Wall Street, there's a role for intermediaries. Because intermediaries tend to be more agile, more flexible, more adaptable to change, more forward-thinking, more nimble, and that can create some value. So it's what it'll morph, it'll transform what intermediaries will do, but their ingenuity, I believe, will win out.
Okay.
Excuse me. Is this mic on? I'm not sure. Yes, this is John DeCesare with WCL Consulting. Bradley, when you talked about mergers are tricky, and one of the first elements you talked about was the cultural blend. Mm-hmm. Could you share with us some of the techniques that your investment due diligence team look at to see what the gap would be between the buyer and the buyee cultures?
Well, it's probably the single most important thing to get right when you do an acquisition. Make sure that before you do the acquisition, you know for a fact that your cultures are compatible, because it's very difficult to change a culture. If you're an honest company and you're buying a dishonest company, you're not going to change that culture to your level of ethics just by rolling out a code of business ethics. If you're a fast-moving company and you buy a company that's a slow-moving company, it's difficult to get them to move at a different pace. If you're a company that's performance-oriented, if you have a culture that has a high level of accountability, and you're buying a company that is more on the pendulum of work-life balance, more on the life than the work, and not prone to incentive compensation, that's going to be difficult to merge those cultures. None of those are impossible, but they're very, very difficult. So what you have to do is really understand what the culture is. And let me tell you something. It's like a marriage. You don't know who you're married until the honeymoon is over and you've been married for about 6 to 12 months. And then the fun begins. Then you really know who your spouse is and how you're going to make this work. When you buy a company, you think you have it all figured out. But then you really get in depth, meeting the people, meeting the customers, meeting the vendors. And it's salesmanship. You have to you have to demonstrate what value you're bringing to the relationship to each of those stakeholders and convince them that working together is a winner for both parties. And you have to show all those stakeholders that you actually do value the relationship. That's why you just spent millions or billions of dollars to buy the company. So it's an elaborate process and one that is fraught with mistakes.
Brad, I've got more. Very good. Well, Brad, thank you again, and also thank you for the Container Port Group for sponsoring this session. I want to, just as a small sign of our appreciation, I would like to give you
thank you very much.
Speaker Award.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to welcome Brad Lawfer with the Lawfer Group International, who will be coming up to stage to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.